Oh.
Hello, Mackenzie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. It's a beautiful stained glass window I'm seeing. Are you currently in a makeshift church?
No, it's actually my house.
Beautiful window.
Yeah, the door's like that too.
Huh. Now I know Braden Shuck used to live in a church.
Oh yeah.
Downtown, so that's why I was asking. I thought, well, maybe she lives in something like that. Actually, I think that'd be pretty cool.
$12 out of your money because that's coming out of my account.
We got about 5 minutes here before the bell rings, sort of to speak. I should go out and find a bell and like actually play it.
I'm 15.
What? Who was it? Russell Wilson?
Yes. Russell Wilson?
Russell Wilson.
You drink me faster than that.
Oh, that's the wrong kind of bell. Ooh, I know where I got one. I actually have an app called Bells that I used for something else. Where's it at? Bells of Peace. Yeah. Let's go to the App Store. Well, I just don't know if it'll download in time here. Maybe.
told you.
There we go. We've got 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started here. Hello, everybody. If you want to check in real quick just to make sure you're working, I know I told you to stay mute. I've already talked to Mackenzie. Is there anybody else in here who'd like to check in just so they know that they're working? Feel free to unmute yourself. You do have that capability. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I would mute yourself because of background noise in your houses, or for the propensity to just jump in for conversation. I do have 30 minutes here to get through the presentation, and so that's what I'm going to do. This presentation is a continuation of what we were doing in class at Marshall High School. I didn't see any point, given the majority of the audience at this point is probably students from Marshall High School, to go back and try to start over with the course. I'll fill in the course later as time goes on with the beginning parts of the semester, but for now we're going to continue on. We did talk a little bit about PTSD when we were together last time, and so that's kind of what I'm going to continue talking about today is PTSD. So it's easy to see how a soldier returning from a combat situation where they're always constantly on guard and alert would easily succumb to such a disease as or a disorder as PTSD. When they return to a secure setting where they no longer need to constantly have their fight or flight response on, but that has become the homeostatic norm of their body. And the same is true of children who've been abused, former prisoners, etc. But all of this is contextually dependent. Rats will run away for sure. They're scared. They'll run away if you try to approach them. But if they're in a corner, they're going to try to fight you. And because there's nothing else that they can do, and that's kind of how the fight or flight response is. If there's nothing else, they will choose to fight. Some species will choose to fight anyway because they're built for that. A shark is a great example that comes to mind. But most species will tend to escape if they can because it's the easier statistical thing to do for survival. It's what they're bred to do. People, pretty much the same way, because you've probably been taught that it's not that smart to just fight with random sketchy people that you don't know. It's probably safer to walk away, avoid the situation. So first, let's talk about the work of a scientist named Hans Sale when we start talking about emotions and the physiological responses here. Sale was one of the first to study the effects of long-term stress, and he theorized about what he called general adaptation syndrome. And it describes 3 stages in reaction to a long-term stress: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. And I think that one of the best examples of this you can see is actually in wild hares or rabbits. Alarm is the stage in which stress hormones are released along the HPA axis. If you come up on a rabbit, all of a sudden you'll notice its ears perk up. It sits there. You can watch its muscles tense up as it's standing there. Resistance is the stage during which the body tries to adapt to long-term stress and to return to pre-alarm functioning. So as the danger moves away or something, you can watch the rabbit relax. Its ears will droop a little bit, start munching on grass or whatever. But when the stressor presents itself for a long time, our stress responses remain activated. And so it's difficult for our bodies to return to non-stress states. And you saw when we talked about PTSD, that's basically what's happening to those people at that time. The final stage is exhaustion, and exhaustion can be both physical and mental. I mean, people who've had mental breakdowns or mental exhaustion and have had to check into hospitals for recovery, that's really what they're experiencing. And in terms of a hare, their fight or flight response will get activated because of that alarm if the stressor is present for a bit of time, and they'll start running around, and eventually they can even die from just pure physical exhaustion of using that fight or flight response there. And so this stage can lead to illness and ultimately even death, even in humans who have exhausted themselves for that long period being in that alert state. A major difference between responses to long-term and short-term stress is that with long-term stress, the body cannot return to its pre-stress state because levels of stress, hormones, especially cortisol, remain elevated. Chronic stress is known to have negative health effects on people. And these include a weakened immune system, damage to DNA, which means our cells actually age faster than they might otherwise. Hence why you can see people who've been through real heavy stress and all of a sudden their hair will turn white. And that is because of damage to the DNA and the hair color gene, actually. Their hair will turn white. Stress really can cause it because it can damage the cells responsible for hair color. So when your parents tell you, you're the one who's caused my gray hair, they may not be wrong because you've caused them a great deal of stress, actually. Now, there are multiple reasons why stress increases your risk for heart disease and things like that. First, cortisol, the stress hormone that's released by our body and our adrenal glands, causes plaque buildup in the arteries. Stress also leads to higher blood pressure. So what you basically have, your heart's pumping faster. It's trying to get more blood through, but that plaque is clogging the arteries so the blood can't get through as quickly. And so it just builds up there. And so now that we've talked about some of the health risks associated with chronic stress, let's talk about some coping strategies of how to deal with chronic stress. And although stress cannot be completely avoided, there are coping methods for long-term stress that can reduce its negative effects. First, it's important to identify what the stressors in your life even are. Right now, probably pretty clear what the stressor in your life is. It might be helpful to keep a journal of stressors, though outside of this, obvious ones, as well as your responses to them. Maladaptive, mal being the Latin prefix for bad. So bad things you can do to deal with stress include, but are not limited to, substance abuse. We all know someone probably who's turned to either drugs or alcohol to deal with stress. Unhealthy eating habits. How often have we been depressed or stressed out and we've gone for that ice cream or that bag of chips or things like that? And usually withdrawal from family activities, friends, things that normally would get us out and get us interacting with people, which is kind of a bad one because it can lead to even further depression by not having that social contact. So even if these techniques do provide some temporary relief to you, they can intensify the effects of stress over the long run and leave us even less equipped to deal with the stress. So instead of resorting to unhealthy habits, once you've identified your stressors, you can try to avoid or change the stressor. But this isn't always possible. If, say, you're stressed because one of your parents is suffering from a serious illness, that's a stressor that cannot be readily eliminated. Stress over what's going on with the coronavirus, us on an individual level, really nothing we can do about it on an individual level but try to cope. And so that stressor is just not something we can avoid. So when you cannot affect the stressor, then try to change your reaction to it. Try to reframe the situation in a more positive light. For me, for example, during this whole COVID-19 thing, I am trying to expand my horizons and make my course material more electronically available. So I see that as kind of a positive here. Modify your standards. I'll be honest with you, I am a perfectionist. You give me a task, I'm trying to make sure everything is done the way the vision in my head of it being done is. And I can be a bit of a perfectionist. And one of the things I've had to learn over the years to reduce my own level of stress is to let other people impart on the vision and don't expect it to go exactly. Think of it as a child. My kids stress me out a lot because I have dreams, I have visions for them, but they're their own people. And then what I've had to learn is they have to live their own life. And it's like anything, a project or anything you do, once it gets out there and other people are involved, it's like a child. It's going to have to live its own life. And you're going to have to let other people get in it. And sometimes that means the vision is going to be altered some. Not saying it still doesn't stress me out, make me weird, but it's something that I at least recognize and I try to deal with. Accept that some things are beyond your control. I mean, there's the old prayer of serenity, I believe, St. Francis, Lord, give me the strength to deal with the things that I can deal with. There are some things in life, like this coronavirus thing, it stresses me out, I'll be honest, especially the government's response, but I'm not in the government. I'm not in the ear of the president. I'm just a common everyday citizen in a small town in Illinois in the middle of the country. And so I just have to accept that, some of this is just beyond my control. And it's better to, okay, what's going to happen and try to deal with it than be stressed out about and worried about what's going to happen. And express and share. Rather than ignore and repress your feelings, find a community of people. And this is one of the things that I wanted to do this for, to bring people together so that we could share our feelings, our emotions about these things, and kind of deal with the stress from it. How can positive emotions protect us against stress, though? When I share, we're sharing our emotions and everything. Obviously, I mean, we're sharing the negative emotions, but usually that sense of community will bring about some positive emotions with us. Last night on the test run for Zoom, I certainly had a group of kids who were, pretty goofy. They were really very giddy. They were happy to see each other. There was the socialization there. So just being able to talk and spend time with other people will certainly usually bring up positive emotions like happiness. So consider this scenario. John is laid off from his job. He becomes depressed and despondent and spends day after day watching television on his couch. Now, Trent is also laid off from his job. He decides to use the time to find a job he likes even better. He works with a career counselor, updates his resume, and actively seeks new positions. Trent feels much better during his layoff than John does during his, and he finds new employment. Trent also approached his situation more positively. Trent was more optimistic, while John was much more pessimistic. So optimism, I'm sure you guys know, optimism is the belief that, okay, things can get better. I mean, the old saying, the glass, you fill a glass of water halfway. The optimist would say the glass is half full. The pessimist would say the glass is half empty. So optimists and pessimists differ in how they deal with adversity and with people in general. Optimists tend to be confident they can solve problems even when facing great adversity, whereas pessimists tend to doubt. And so optimists tend to express less distress than pessimists, which leaves them better able to cope with things. So there is some evidence that the extent to which we are optimistic is actually genetic. It's something we have inherited. But other psychologists, notably Martin Seligman, focus on optimism as a learned skill, that it's something people have to be kind of taught to do, to not focus on the negative. And too often in today's world, the media certainly focuses on the negative because that's what drives people to, oh, let's look at this. There's a certain governmental philosophy that says that, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so they try to gin up crisis, constantly force people to be negative pessimists. The world's going to end from global warming in 10 years unless we do something right now. That kind of thing. And certainly it has had a mental health effect, particularly on a younger generation, such as, majority of my students would be. Not saying that maybe global warming is not a bad thing or something, but certainly ginning up constant crisis and mode over it is affecting, our sense of, optimism and pessimism and our mental health overall. Seligman believes that we can learn to change our self-talk, or the unvocalized thoughts that run in our heads. And we all have that. We all have this story or this vision in our head of what we are and what happens when we do something. For example, if you do poorly on a test, do you sit there and go, God, I'm so stupid. I knew this, and it's just, I'm dumb. I'm a failure. That's your self-talk. That's you telling yourself what you are. And that narration kind of becomes what defines you. You have to change your self-talk to improve that, to maybe something like, I did badly on this test, but I know why. I wasn't quite grasping that. I should have sought help. I'm smarter than this. See, the difference between those two types of self-talk are going to kind of define who you are. So to sit there and think that, oh, I'm smart, I can handle this, maybe there's a line there between, bravado and overconfidence. But certainly if you had that story in your head of that's what you are, you're going to look at situations a lot differently. Your self-talk is going to kind of define whether you're an optimist or a pessimist in that case. Pessimists tend to have negative self-talk, but these thoughts can be challenged. Optimists also tend to have greater self-efficacy, which is the belief in their own competence to produce desired outcomes. And that's where I said the self-talk of an optimist over the failed test is going to be something like, okay, well, I know what I did wrong. I'm going to do better on this. I'm going to do this. That self-talk is defining, that there's still opportunity out there for you to do better, that you're not a miserable failure and that your life is over pretty much. Because that's kind of what pessimism is telling you, isn't it? That there's no chance for change. There's no chance for improvement. And that will keep you down. That will certainly affect your mental health if you do believe that. People with higher self-efficacy are more likely to take on new challenges because they believe in themselves accomplishing those challenges. People with lower self-efficacy, by contrast, are more likely to avoid new challenges, and they're more likely to believe existing problems are more difficult than they actually are. Finally, optimists tend to be happier than pessimists do. But that brings up an interesting psychological question then. What exactly is happiness? It's one of those things that we often think we understand intuitively, but when we actually try to define it, an easy definition kind of eludes us. And think about in your head, how would you define happiness? And think about every scenario where you've been happy, and does that definition actually meet that, emotion? Positive psychology, or the psychology of being an optimist, basically, has identified 3 different layers to the meaning of happiness. First, happiness can mean the experience of pleasure and positive emotions. So you hang out with your friends, you're happy. You like your friends. You have fun talking with them about things that interest you. You're happy. That's the experience of pleasure. Second, happiness can mean feeling engaged in and absorbed by a certain activity. You get to talking to me about the social sciences, about philosophy. I can be a very happy person because I enjoy it. The time just flies whenever I'm doing it. And finally, happiness can mean feeling engaged, not just in any activity, but rather in a meaningful activity. When I talk about the social sciences and philosophy with my students, and they can then use that to improve their lives or to do something that they want to do or achieve in life, that's meaningful to me. I feel like I've impacted them. I've helped them live a better life. And so I'm happy. Something that is valuable to more than just the person doing it. Studies suggest that how happy we feel is also partially genetic. Some people are just, born pessimists, but that doesn't mean they can't change that and work through it just because it's a genetic trait. It's also partly dependent on external circumstances, but not nearly as much as one might think. So I've got something here. I'm still kind of learning how to use this, so I apologize. I don't know what a chat question here. Hey, I can't hear anything from Heaven. Heaven, I don't know. Is anybody else having this problem? Mackenzie, you're the only one I see up here. Are you having this problem? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
You can hear me okay, Mackenzie?
Yeah.
Okay. So Heaven, I don't know. The best I could offer you is maybe refresh, rejoin the group, because it looks like everything is okay here. I'm going to type that out real quick since you can't hear me. I know this is being recorded later, if nothing else. Okay. Happiness is a lot dependent on external circumstances. What's going on right now, sometimes it's probably going to be hard to find some happiness out here regarding all of this. But you look for the little things. I'm happy to see all of you guys here today with me. In fact, the experience of happiness is perhaps less than 20% dependent on the situations in which we find ourselves, and more on how we frame those situations. So for example, people who accumulate great wealth aren't necessarily happier than those who don't. And those who struggle with major illness are less happy at first, but soon bounce back to average happiness levels. And so, the old saying that money can't buy happiness actually is true. Because if you are already a pessimist and your self-talk is that you're a failure, you come into money, well, what are you going to do with that money? Your self-talk is going to lead you into bad decisions, negative decisions, which are going to cost you. If your self-talk, if you're a miserable failure and you have $1 million, all you are is a miserable failure who has $1 million. It's not, if your self-talk is saying that about yourself, that you're a miserable failure, the money's not going to change anything about that. There are lots of very poor people who are very happy with their life because they're optimists and they look for those opportunities and they look for things like that. And so happiness in large part is how you define it contextually with what's going on. What's going on right now with this virus and the quarantine? Very depressing, admittedly, but how do you framing it? I'm spending more time at home with my kids. I'm getting an afternoon nap. I'll tell you what, you can't beat that. And I'm learning about a lot of new electronic apps and everything like Zoom that we're on right now. And so I'm kind of trying to frame it and be optimistic about, okay, what can I do to get out of this? And hopefully, I think by the fact that you're here listening to me right now is you being optimistic. Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to still continue my learning rather than shutting myself in. So I'm proud of you for that your self-talk is going, okay, I'm going to still invest in this growth and knowledge here. So while we probably all imagine circumstances in which we think we would be very happy, a psychologist named Dan Gilbert has shown that we really are not so great at predicting the circumstances that will actually make us happy. One aspect of our circumstances that can really improve our happiness, however, is the strength of our social support network. Now, if you had taken sociology with me, you probably remember the big study by Durkheim on suicide, where his conclusion really was that the stronger our social support network was, the less likely we were to commit suicide, or people were. And that holds true here too. The stronger our social network, the more we can share our emotions, talk them out, share the joy of just being with other people who are our friends, the less likely we are to be depressed. Studies suggest that people with stronger support networks are happier. Friends and family can strengthen our network. And less obviously, so can psychological therapy, because therapy provides us with support for the problems we are facing. And certainly in a much more isolated age where we don't have those contacts with others as much as we would like because of social media, jobs, things like that. Sometimes a therapist can provide that outlet for us to talk to someone about our emotions. And trust me, I'm not the first person I'm going to go, ooh, I need to see a therapist. But I certainly can see the benefits of it. And were I in a real depressed state because I didn't have these social connections, I would strongly consider seeing a therapist. Now, this brings us to the next section. If you're happy, how do we get people to be happy? How do we get them to be optimistic? And this is the field of motivation. And this is kind of where we get into another subfield of psychology, because the science of motivation is really what defines sports psychology. So Jillian, Heaven, those of you who are, athletes on here or watching, this is an area that would really interest you, because how do you get yourself motivated for a game? And let's say you're playing a really weak opponent. You're playing Martinsville. No offense to Martinsville students, but comparatively, you're a very small school and typically not the strongest opponent a school like Marshall would face. And so, if you're playing for Marshall and you've got to play Martinsville, how do you get yourself up for that game? I mean, how do you, motivate yourself to, okay, still do your best for a game like that? Do you even know what it means to be motivated? Probably you do. Motivation is just the desire to do something. It's an impulse that inspires some action. But how about this? Do you know the source of motivation? Probably you've experienced plenty of times when you wished you knew the answer to this question so that you could find the drive to do something that you didn't want to do, such as studying for a test. Furthermore, you probably already realized that there need not be any single correct answer to the question of what causes motivation. In fact, over the course of history, psychologists have proposed various theories about its origins. In this segment, we're going to mention 3 of those theories. The first is instinct theory. In other words, we're born with it. It's instinctual. Instincts are just unlearned actions that exist consistently throughout a species. So in other words, all humans are born with this. We've probably all seen or experienced a doctor striking a patient's knee with a little rubber mallet to make sure it jerks the leg in response, that knee-jerk reaction. Our knee-jerk reaction is an instinct. It's something that humans consistently do, even though none of us individually had to learn how to do it. As you probably suspect, instinct theory is the idea that motivation results from biological hardwiring or instincts. Now, that's just a general theory. Numerous psychologists have theorized more specifically about how instincts motivate us. For example, Sigmund Freud theorized about two very broad instincts, a life instinct, the eros, and a death instinct called thanatos. Yes, just like the guy from the Adventures, if that's what you were thinking. His name is Greek for death. William James, by contrast, theorized about a whole host of human instincts. Irrespective of how many instincts we might have, do you believe that instincts alone motivate all our behaviors? If you don't, you're not alone. Another general theory about the underpinning of motivation has been called drive reduction theory. And according to this theory, physiological needs, the needs of our body, create aroused states, drives that motivate us to reach those needs. For example, if your water levels are low in your body, you're going to be thirsty. And you're going to have a drive to drink. In other words, your body is going to respond to that thirst. You know, someone offers you a glass of water in exchange for help with their homework. You're probably going to help them with their homework in order to meet that drive of thirst. Drinking some water will lower your thirst and reduce your need for water, and therefore you're more motivated to do things for water. Now, the idea is that lowering these drives when they're aroused helps to maintain homeostasis, or the tendency to aim toward a constant internal state. There are hormones involved with regulating thirst, particularly in homeostasis generally. For thirst, the hormones include angiotensin, produced by the kidneys, as well as the antidiuretic hormone, which the pituitary gland produces. There's that word again, pituitary. But certainly not all our motivations are based on reducing drives. After all, sometimes we're motivated to increase tension or arousal when we're bored, for example. I like to ride roller coasters, though I haven't done it in years, and I'm kind of afraid at my age that my stomach's just going to be too queasy for it, to be honest. But that doesn't necessarily decrease any drive that I have just because I like to do it. To the contrary, in fact, it arouses my fear responses. So another theory of arousal is known as arousal theory or motivation. It helps to explain the existence of motivators that both increase and decrease our levels of tension or arousal. And this theory maintains that we aim to achieve a state of optimum arousal. So when we have too little stimulation, we look for more, but when we are overstressed, we look for less. And that's everything that I have for today for you. I'm going to stop the share here so I can see who all is here with me. Now, do you guys have any questions for me at all at this point? And I apologize, I didn't have my camera up, so this whole time I've been out of focus. I don't know, this webcam doesn't have an automatic, it has an automatic focus. I have no way of manually adjusting this. I'm going to unmute everybody just to say hello, see how you guys are all doing. Any questions?
Were you the one doing the highlighting? Was that you or was that someone else?
No, that was not me. I wondered who was doing that, but it was not me.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we could see other people writing on it.
No, apparently, because it wasn't me doing any highlighting, so. Was it any of you?
It wasn't me.
I didn't.
Why would I highlight it?
Could see a green highlighter scribble and I couldn't erase it.
Oh, you did it? Huh?
No, I did not. I couldn't erase it.
Oh, well, that's all right. Whoever did it, I guess it's all right. I'm going to go smack this camera around a little bit to see if I can't fix the focus. Never mind my hand here. That didn't do a darn thing, did it?
No.
Any questions over today's presentation or anything?
So do you do this every day?
I'm going to do this every day. Well, except for the
Okay.
weekends. I might take the weekends off. And if there is no, if there's nothing going on, there might be some days I'll take off, but I'll let you know. I'll still text you the meeting code and everything. So
it is a different code every day?
Yes. And I'm trying to find a central place to put those codes so that I don't necessarily have to send you a remind text every day. You can just go out and look. The main central place I have right now is the TPSS Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, I would highly encourage you to like that page so that you have access to this stuff. Let me show you what it looks like here.
Are you gonna do it at the same time every day?
Yes, right now. That might change, but right now, yes.
I love how I'm the only one from my class hour in here.
Well, I imagine maybe some people. Okay, never mind this. This is me preparing for
What?
my other class here. So. That's not what I wanted to share anyway. So.
Right here.
Johnny, what are you doing?
Well, I don't see it on here. So. Stop that. See if I can't bring it up on my own here. Post it. That's right. Post attendee. Okay, this is the Facebook page. This is what it looks like. It's called Teaching Philosophy in the Social Sciences. And you'll see up down here, I posted the video from yesterday. And here's the schedule of classes for today with the meeting codes. So if I click on see more here, you can see for Western Civ 2, this is what I got coming up later today at 11:20. So you can see that. And for psychology down here has the same thing. Now, what I don't know is if you just click on the Zoom thing here, will it take you to the meeting? I'm not sure. That'd be helpful if it did, but I'm not sure about that. Any other questions? Then our time is up for today. I'm glad you guys joined me. If you're interested, even if you can come watch the economics one that starts in about 10 minutes. And I'm going to talk in there about choosing a career if you're interested in being here for that one. Or some of you already had it, but if you're interested in just
Sure.
all right, you'll have to go to another meeting then for that. So I'm going to end this meeting now. You guys have a good day. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Yeah. I can leave. How do I leave?
I don't know how to. Okay.